Hi, this is Jürgen Rasmussen. Welcome to the Provocative Hypnosis blog. Today's topic is smoking clients. What working with smokers, mostly now ex-smokers, over the last 20 plus years have taught me about smoking, about alleged addictions, about human beings, about this work in general. So I'd like to share with you a few recent case stories from my practice working with smokers and some of the conclusions and learnings that I have made from those cases, and also some old learnings that I'm having to relearn time and time again. So the first case I want to share with you is a guy in his 50s who was a pretty heavy smoker. I think he was somewhere around 30 cigarettes a day, if my memory serves me correctly. Had a few previous attempts at quitting. Had successfully stopped for a few months many years ago. Came into my office, and one of the things that I do is I like to prepare. So over the years, I've noticed quite a few patterns in terms of, what the people who quit tend to have in common and what the people who don't quit tend to have in common. So I've devised a bunch of tasks for my smoking clients to teach them some psychological skills, to prepare them, to get them ready for the work. And one of the tasks that I give people is to write down every single cigarette that they smoke for the last 7 days before they come in. So they have to before they smoke the cigarette, they have to jot down the time. They have to answer the question, what feeling am I hoping to get by smoking this cigarette? And then after having smoked a cigarette, they have to answer, what am I actually feeling right now? Now, and I always say to people, look, I only work with people when they complete this 100%. So don't come in here with a list where you've done 95% of them, or where you say, yeah, I've written everyone down except for the party on Saturday, or like, I'm going to send you home if you do that. So make sure that it's 100% commitment. Now, there's several reasons to do this. All the associations that a smoker has around cigarettes are learned. So these associations that say that, this is my best friend, or, it helps me relax, or it's my reward, or it's the cure for boredom, or whatever. All of these are ideas. They're learned ideas. They have no reality to them whatsoever, but they're felt as if they're real, right? So what this task does is that by having people write this, you're engaging the mind to begin to look at the smoking process and to really look at what is the intent here and what is the actual consequence here, and to do that in real time repetitively. This kind of forces the brain to reconsider and to take stock of the whole thing repetitively. It also brings people off autopilot and gets them to actually think. So it begins to break the pattern apart. And also it builds motivation, and commitment the more someone engages in it. So this particular client came in and said that he was very motivated, but admitted to not quite having done the task. So I sent him home, as I always do. And he was a little bit pissed off, but I explained to him. I said, look, I told you very clearly before you came here, only come here with a complete list, and I will send you home. So we got a choice. There's two people in this conversation. At this point, one guy who's honest, one guy who's lied. I've kept my part of the bargain. I could start lying too by working with you, but that would be steeping down to your level, or you can come up to mine. We'll give you one more chance. So he said, okay, accepted. So he went home, and this time he did the task 100%. And he said that during that week of doing that task, um, I think after 4 or 5 days, a flip in his mind just switched. Like, boom, that's it. And he essentially quit before he came into my office. And the work we did together was essentially just, topping on the pizza. It was just a formality. The shift had already been made during the task. And I've spoken to him a couple of times since, and happy to tell you that there's no urge to smoke. There's no thinking around it. It's a done deal. So this is something that's happened quite a few times over the years, is that people actually quit during the task, and especially if I've sent them home due to them not quite doing the task. Smoking is an either or thing. It's all about flipping that switch. And people who successfully quit have a tendency to quit on a particular day, right? So if you start interviewing people who used to smoke and who no longer do, you'll see that a very common pattern for the people who are successful is that they just either spontaneously or they deliberately choose a day and they just quit. They just do it. And if the decision is made on an emotional level to quit, like that's it, there's usually very little thinking or withdrawal or really any problems. Whereas the people who have been hooked by the pharmaceutical industry, who believe in nicotine addiction, which is complete nonsense, by the way. There is no such thing as nicotine addiction. But for the people who believe in this nonsense, and who try to scale down on the cigarettes as if they are addicted, and who try to use patches and all that sort of stuff, these people usually struggle. These people usually struggle. Now you might say, how can you say that there's no addiction? Because I've seen people who have smoked for decades stop in a couple of hours, not have a single thought, stressful feeling, nothing around it. And there's nothing in their physiology that needs anything from that cigarette to do absolutely anything. The whole thing is an idea. So a lot of my work revolves around persuading people and helping them to see that they've essentially been duped by medical doctors and the pharmaceutical industry and pharmacists and the media. It's of course there's an artistry in terms of how you do that persuasion. But I always set people up to quit in one session in one day. The record so far is a guy I worked with in 2006. He had smoked since 1956, and he was between 60 and 70 cigarettes a day. He slept 4 hours a day. He had this, it's just completely insane. And he quit during a 2-hour session. He just flipped the switch. He had no issues with it whatsoever. But he had this coat, and in the coat he had this pocket where he used to have his cigarettes. And he quit in October, and until Christmas in December, his hand kind of did its own thing and went into the pocket looking for the cigarettes, and then went back out. That took a couple of months before it spontaneously stopped. Here's something funny. How long someone has quit and how much someone has quit does not give you any predictive power whatsoever as to how easily it will be to help someone quit. None. No predictive powers whatsoever. A lot of people think that helping someone who's smoked 40 a day for 40 years is necessarily hard. No, it's often easier. It's often easier because they've often had more attempts to smoke on their own, and they learn something from each attempt, right? And the belief in the conventional way of quitting smoking has a tendency to weaken, and sometimes they've started to develop health problems that often add to their motivation. So quite often for me, The toughest smoking client is the person who likes to smoke and who doesn't really have any symptoms, and who may not be that freedom oriented, right? And who really bought into the medical model. Quite often, it can be way rougher to work with someone who smokes 5 a day or just does the occasional cigarette. Is often way tougher to work with than the person who does 40 a day and has done so for 40 years. So don't make the mistake of thinking that because someone has smoked for a long time, they're necessarily harder to work with. That's not necessarily the case at all. Second client I want to share with you is a woman who got in touch with me, and I didn't quite like her vibe. And I'm not sure she really liked mine either. But she had some heart issues, and seemed desperate enough. I was kind of on the fence of accepting her, but I did, and I got some warning signals pretty quickly that this was gonna be rough. So she was seeing me at 2 o'clock that day, and I had an 11 o'clock appointment. And she'd sent me a bunch of like SMSs, asking questions and I didn't respond to them. And she was really angry because I hadn't responded to them. But I had been in session with a client, so I said to her, "Look, I don't sit around with a cell phone just responding to messages all day. I make my living seeing clients and doing follow-ups and stuff like that." And then she couldn't quite find my office, so I went to fetch her, straight around the gas station on the corner, and she was really grumpy and irritable. And that's never a good sign. It's never a good sign. You want someone to be grateful that you're seeing them. You want them to be polite and courteous. And so when someone comes to see you and they're grumpy and they're irritable and they have this attitude of you fix me and you kind of, I should have just sent her home at that particular time, because not quite liking her vibe on the phone and the irritation around me not responding to her texts on the very same day, and the kind of moodiness and the irritability on first contact, that's way more than enough. I'm a bit slow sometimes. I have to relearn these lessons usually over time. But if someone doesn't like you, or if you don't really like them, it's usually a good idea to just let them go. One thing I've found is provocation, like genuine anger. That's fine, as long as people are responding and that you're kind of in the mix. But any sign of contempt or hostility, if a client is hostile and showing you signs of contempt, let them go. Just let them go. Now, this client, surprise, surprise, had not really done her task to completion. Like she said, well, she'd mostly done it, but not 100%. So I sent her home. She got furious, even crying, really went victim all out, entitled, that sort of stuff. And I was talking to her and staying really, calm, but good boundaries. I explained my reasoning. I said to her I would give her one more chance if she would commit to doing it. And she gave me some fuzzy stuff about that being too much to ask. And, so I said, if you as an adult can't commit to that, I'm not going to work with you. But then she decided that she was going to do it, and then later that night she sent me an SMS where she apologized for her behavior and for her irritability and stuff like that. And I had a glimmer of hope. So she came back the next session. She had actually done her task, to her credit. I did a session where I really tried to help people see that smoking is a psychological illusion. And was really hard for her to listen. It's a very busy mind, very chattery, very. We did not jive, and I did some hypnotic work, but she did not really respond well to it. Like, she was fidgeting and moving all over the place and stuff like that. And we ended the session, and I had booked her to come in a week later, because that seemed right to do. And she sent me an SMS the day before the next appointment and said that she didn't want to come back. She didn't really like me that much, didn't enjoy the work, felt it was a waste of time. Hadn't smoked at all, but said that she found it difficult, and would I refund at least some of the money. So I said, sure, let's call it quits. I'll refund you half the money, and that's that. So and I don't know if she smokes or not, but these things happen. And this was just a chance for me to relearn something I kind of already know, but you don't always learn by experience. You have to reflect on your experiences, and sometimes you have to relearn the same silly lessons time and time again. And no one has 100% success rate. It's always the client who quits. I'm just kind of a facilitator. Um, I have a couple of other interesting ones. I work with a client who really liked smoking, really, really liked smoking, and only really wanted to quit because she knew that there were health concerns. And did the tasks, did a session, did my best to do aversive type techniques like a compulsion blowout, for those of you who know NLP, trying to associate smoking with very negative feelings and stuff like that. Seemed to be, kind of successful. Had her back for a follow-up, and she was still not smoking, but she seemed a little bit, yeah, but I'd still sometimes like to. And since then, I haven't heard from her despite trying to reach her. So I don't know. I always schedule with people, these phone conversations afterwards, and I don't know what the results are with this particular client. You may be tempted to conclude that the fact that I didn't get a hold of her means necessarily that she started smoking again. Don't do that. It doesn't necessarily do that. I've had a lot of clients who haven't responded to calls or haven't been able to get touch of, but then later, 5 years later, they send me a client who tells me how happy they've been with the work. Like, you just never know. We human beings are weird, bizarre, and often quite unpredictable, and that's part of the charm of this particular work as well. Another client not that long ago, it was a former drug addict who had used a lot of drugs and quit. And the toughest one to get off for him had been amphetamines. But when he finally did quit, he did quit in one day. And he did it as part of this rehabilitation program. But he had never been able to quit cigarettes. Never been able to quit cigarettes. So he did his task, came in, and what was very clear from the task was that all that he was really looking for was peace of mind. And this really is what people are looking for. Smoking looks like a solution to people, but what people are usually looking for is just peace of mind. They're looking for their mind to slow down. They're looking for their body to relax. They're looking to access that stillness, that peace. And cigarettes is a fraud, obviously, because it increases your stress levels, but it looks like a solution to people. And as long as it looks like a solution or the best solution, people will continue to smoke. So I asked him, do you have an urge right now for a cigarette? And he said, yeah, it's quite strong in my body. So I taught him to feel his feeling, like to really feel it, but to observe it with precision. A bit like they do in Vipassana meditation. And I had him I had him really sort his experience into components and really feel into it and track it and separate the body sensations from the imagery and the self-talk, the stories, right? And every 15 seconds or so, I would say the word now, and I would have him either say stable if everything seemed stable, or changing if something was changing in his experience. Now, he had never attended to his own experience in this way before. Most people haven't. And what he discovered was that the feeling automatically resolved itself. And when it did, he was bathing in the very stillness, peace, and calm that he thought that the feeling had told him to smoke a cigarette to gain access to. And this was a boom, mind-blowing experience for him to see that the feeling undid itself. And that by being able to be with the feeling and observe it very precisely, letting the feeling undo itself helped him access the very stillness and the peace of mind that he thought that the feeling had told him to smoke a cigarette to get. So, and I was then able to in a skillful, artistic way, to help him see that, look, you haven't had a cigarette, but you have access to the peace and the stillness. What does that say about the feeling? What does that say about the concept of addiction? So his task for the next week then was that every time this feeling would come, he would do the same thing. And that almost always worked, except for a couple of occasions where he had one cigarette. And then he came back and we did more, and he saw it even more deeply. It had a more profound insight into the illusory nature, where he could see that none of the sensations in his body told him anything about smoking a cigarette. This was a story, a thought construct that his mind added to the sensations based upon a belief in nicotine addiction. Once he really saw that, the whole shebang went. And when last heard from, he was doing great as well. So this was a very good, natural case. I had a few months ago, I had another female client who came in, did one session, felt that it was not useful and wanted her money back, and I gave her money back. This happens not often, but on occasion. And this was also a client who seemed a bit passive aggressive and a bit entitled and a bit hostile. So you could say I'm a really slow learner. I obviously didn't pick that up. The funniest one is, and this is fairly recent. I suddenly got a SMS where someone wrote, "Hey, you helped me stop smoking 5 or 6 years ago. I need help again. Can I come see you?" So I called the number. And the person was like, "Who are you?" And I said, "Well, you sent me an SMS, that I helped you stop smoking 5 or 6 years ago." And he said, "Yeah, but you sound like a man." And I said, "It's quite astute." "Well, I am. And I was a man 5 or 6 years ago too." And he was like, "Oh, I thought you were a woman." It's like, "Really? Like, have you seen my name? Have you seen my picture? You notice my name? Like, you..." He was like, so a woman in a different city had actually helped him stop smoking, and he ended up sending me the SMS. So this guy was probably not the most well organized dude in the world, right? But he'd stopped smoking in one session, and this was like the film text, what people think of hypnosis to be. Like he went in, he thought the whole thing was just BS, and then he apparently, just lost consciousness and woke up, and since then it was gone. But a year later, he got cocky at a party, and this is usually what happens when people revert back. He got cocky at a party, and he started smoking again, and he was smoking for the last 5 years. So and then he said, but do you do hypnosis? And I said, yes. Can I come see you? And I was like, why the hell not? Come. And I did not give him any of my usual tasks. So I thought, I'm not going to do what I usually do at all. I'm going to break all my own rules. There's a good reason for doing this. It shakes things up, gives you a chance to learn something. If you on occasion break your own rules, do something completely different, just for the hell of it. Just see what happens. So he comes in, and we both very quickly agree that the learning from last session he did 5 or 6 years ago with his woman was to never again try one. So he was like, that's the learning. Now, what I started to do in a very typical Ericksonian way, I started to ask him very detailed questions about his previous hypnotic experience. The sights in the room, the temperature, what it felt like to sit in the chair, the sound of the woman's voice. And I would ask him these questions and give him time to really process. Of course, what very often happens when you do that is that the person begins to reactivate those circuits and those memories. They begin to access the same state again. I could see his eyes get really glazy, and I told him to close them. I said, now go into a deep hypnotic trance, because that was what he expected. I gave him very direct authoritarian suggestions, that he was now a non-smoker and would remain so for the rest of his life, and just like really drilled this into him. And offered a lot of suggestions for amnesia, for forgetting the whole thing. And what really helped too is that at the end he actually fell asleep and he started snoring. So I pressed my hand on his shoulder and I said, "No!" And he came back like this. And he was like, "Wow, that was awesome." I said, "Now you can feel great." And he was like, "Yeah, I do." And it was a full convincer of what he was expecting. And I've spoken to him since, and he's had the exact same experience as last time. No urges, no problems, no nothing. He had a little bit of an inkling at a party, but he didn't act on it or add any meaning to it. So the whole thing, the whole thing went away. So he seems to be doing good as well. So working with people is quite interesting. The people who have a tendency to do well are the people who don't believe in nicotine addiction. So helping people see through the myth of that, informing them, persuading them, is usually very, very important. It's very important to view it as an either or thing. To do it fully, that's the easy way. And to help people see that the only reason they do it is because they think that it's a solution to something. And you have to kind of help them see the illusory nature of that, right? To help them access the peace of mind that they innately have anyways. So I hope this was useful to hear some actual cases from my practice. If you would like to work with me, I invite you to contact me at provocativehypnosis.com. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to post them wherever you find the video. And until next time, enjoy.